Activate your energy.
Welcome to the Activated Authors Podcast, a show where we distill the core principles of what it takes to become a happy, healthy, and productive author, no matter what stage of the journey you're at. I'm your host, Daniel Wilcox. I'm an international best-selling author, as well as an author coach, speaker, and creative entrepreneur. But most importantly, I'm a lifelong student of all things productivity, psychology, and human behavior. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. Without further ado, let's dive in. What is up, activators, and welcome to another episode of the Activated Authors Podcast. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by the amazing Ella Barnard. Ella Barnard is the host of the Author Like a Boss podcast and owner of Author Boss Academy. She is an author and publishing coach who loves helping creative people connect with their audiences and with each other. Her superpower is finding the most effective and least complicated tools for every step of publishing and marketing. She is also a cat lady, obsessed with dragons, and passionate about helping creative people make money with their craft. Ella is committed to using positivity to spark productivity and has 7 years of experience as a marketing and mindset mentor for entrepreneurs, coaches, and creative women from all walks of life. Ella, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Daniel. I am very excited to be chatting with you.
I'm super excited to be talking to you. I mean, we had a little bit of a chat before we started recording about sort of some of the similarities in, what we do and, how we think. But I wanted to kind of start by going in a bit of a weird direction based off of your introduction, because I feel like we also share another passion, and it's one that you'll probably see behind me, and that's dragons. So what is your obsession with dragons?
Okay, so dragons. So I have like dreams, like in my dreams, many times I've turned into a dragon. I shift into a dragon and like fly around. Like I can like, and then some, I can like on call, like pull out my wings and like, I'm like, okay. And usually they're like rescuing, because I do a lot of rescue dreams. Like I'm like, people need help. Whoosh, like my wings come out and I'm like, okay, let's go. And so that's plus like, that's a lot, but like, because I love them, because they're like big, magical. And the books, my favorite books that I read in them, they're smart, like super duper intelligent and like fierce.
Voiced by Sean Connery.
Yes. I really just love, I actually, at one point, like I grew up in a conservative religion, and when I left it, I was like, what do I want to believe in? Like, what new beliefs do I want to have? What do I really have? And like prefacing this by saying all my beliefs are based on like, I'm like, does this make me a better person? Like, does this help me be does this allow me to be a better person and show up as my best self? So that's like, I'm like, that's the bar for my beliefs.
I love that.
And at one point I was like, does believing in dragons make me a better person? And I'm like, yes, it does. Yes, it does. We just can't see them because they're magical and smart. And do I love the idea of living in a world with dragons? Yes. So that's kind of like, they just make me happy, basically.
I love that. And I'm incredibly jealous of just dreams where you shift into the dragon. I've never had anything like that. I've had, dreams where they'll kind of like appear in the distance, like not even that many, just a couple, but like to actually transform into the dragon. That's power. Yeah.
It's and it's like symbolic. Like one time, like at one time at like a really, learning difficult challenge time in my life. And then I had a realization, one of kind of those like core, like self-realizations. And I had a dream that I was like looking in a mirror, like different mirrors at a time, like past, previous to this realization, current realization, and the future. And it's like, and then in the last one, I looked in the mirror and it was like, freaking awesome dragon, like fire breathing dragon. And I was like, that's my best self. That's who I am.
Yeah.
Dragons are my spirit.
I'm a goddamn dragon.
Yes.
What color dragon? And is it particular? Because I know you can get different elemental dragons. Like
mine's purple. Purple for sure. Purple is my deep purple though, like a dark, royal, darker. Like if there was like a midnight purple, that purple.
Oh, yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I don't know how to segue away from dragons, but I was incredibly, but we'll find a way. So why don't you tell my audience a little bit about yourself and your writing journey and how you got to where you are today?
Well, I started reading a lot of fantasy with dragons in it.
There we go.
Segue.
Boom, bring it around.
Actually, I started reading romance and then I turned into fantasy romance and then I went to fantasy. I've had quite a few challenges. Like, I don't think I grew up struggle emotionally mostly. And so books have always been like my safe place where I can, it's a safe place. And I think they are for a lot of people. So I don't think that's very unusual. So I've read a ton, like I've probably read tens of thousands of books in my life because I'd rather read a book than watch a movie. I'd rather read a book than watch TV. I'd rather, it's my go-to. And so, I grew up like, what can I do with a job with books? But I wasn't raised in a situation where like people would encourage me to do that kind of thing. It was like, oh, do something reliable, be a teacher. And I love kids too. So I did end up being a teacher, but it turns out while I'm really great at loving kids and like, loving kids, and I was young, I wasn't that great at like imparting the information in the structure that the school provided. Like, I'm like
kind of key.
Yeah. I was like, oh, and I'm like within the context of like, I was teaching special ed in New York City, brand new, high schoolers going through puberty. So like, it wasn't just me, but the environment wasn't supportive enough for me to do it well. And so I stopped that and I was like, okay, went back to adminning. And I'm like, admin assistant is not fulfilling me at all. And so I'm like, what can I do to go back, do something that I love with books? And so I just started reaching, and I've had like a shelf of like books about writing, like that's just grown like over the years, but I never was writing. I never thought I could. And, but I would just like read the books. I'm like, oh yeah, and Lamont's Bird by Bird. I'm just going to casually read Stephen King's on writing, just, because I love books and so gradually I started looking at all these entrepreneurial stuff because I don't like other people telling me what to do. Like, what kind of business can I have? And I got into, and this, self-publishing started becoming a thing as I'm looking at the entrepreneurial stuff. I'm like, this is kind of amazing that you can just, put a book out and somebody can read it. But I wasn't brave enough to put the book out myself. So I basically started like interviewing. I started my own podcast and just kind of got into the space and I started a Facebook group for authors. And then after I started that Facebook group, and a bunch of people came in, I was like, I could figure out how to help them. And then I started a podcast because I'm like, I'll just do that and see if people want to be on it. And I emailed people and they said, or Facebook messaged them and they said yes. And I'm like, I am nobody, but they were like, yeah, sure. Cause people in the space are so lovely. And so I interviewed, like 70 authors. And then finally I'm like, okay, let me put together what they've taught me, like everything that I've seen, everything that I've heard, like consistently from all the authors, like what shows up all the time. I created a program to try and help authors. And I've just now come to the realization, because for a long time I wasn't valuing myself. So I'm like, oh, people aren't buying it because they didn't, I was framing it as like, people didn't trust me because I haven't done it myself, which they didn't. Like, people weren't buying it because I hadn't done it myself. But I recently came to the understanding that like, there's a different perspective. I created that program based off of the information from like 50 plus 6-figure authors. So it isn't just one author made it, wanted to help people, and then shared their one way that they did it. Mine was, I interviewed like 70 people, created the program based off of all of their successes. And then I was like, well, let me do the program. Let me do my program myself now. Cause at that point I had the courage. Like, I was like, I'm ready to do my own fiction now. I'm like, okay, let me try. And it was kind of like, almost kind of like a, what the fuck, screw it. I'm just going to do it at that point. And so I did my own program. I published and I had all the same mindset. Like in December 2019, I was like, okay, I'm going to write short romances because I'm a slow writer and I'm not a fast writer. And I like writing takes time to make money, mostly because of the time that it takes to write. And so I started with short romances because I'm like, oh, that's less time between releases because they're shorter and they're about 10 to 15,000 words. So
okay,
like 40 to 50 Amazon pages. So short. And so I was able to release relatively quickly, on brand, doing all the things that I'd learned from all these other authors. And so I want that context to be, because I don't want everybody to think they can just go out and make, have like you can go out and have the success that I did, but it's like within the context of I'd interviewed a bazillion, like a lot of people and spent a lot of time thinking about exactly what they did so that I could repeat it. But it worked. And within, so December, I was like, I'm going to release it in January. Mid-January, I was like, I'm scared. And and because I'm scared, I haven't actually finished the thing that I need to release in the next 2 weeks. So then I buckled down because I'm like, I'm going to keep my word to myself. I'm going to do it. And so on January 31st of 2020, my first fiction short story novel came out under my pen name, Liz Fox. And then I did the program. I kept releasing, and by the third month, I made 2,900, not total. That was the third month. And I'm not counting January as my first month because it was January 31st. So so February was the first month, March, April, I made $2,900. But and then in May, I made like $4,000 that month. And so it was kind of amazing. And it was like gratifying. I'm like, see, it worked. Yes. And then, but then COVID was happening and I was struggling, then the other things were happening at the same time. And so now I'm reaching out to share more about like 2 years later, I'm like, okay, let me talk to people and share like how it's possible, because I think the world always needs, I like more books, and I like helping creative people make money so they don't have to be admin assistants where their like soul is draining out of their, every day they come home like, I don't like this. This is awful. Like, I'm like, no, you should be able to do what you love. So yeah. That was long.
No, that was perfect. There's a lot in there to pick apart. And I think the first thing is, number one, it really upset me when you said January 2020, and then you were like 2 years later, because time has just flown, and that I'm not a fan of that.
No.
But I mean, there's quite a lot to go into there, because there were so many points along the way where you could have stopped. And as you were talking about this decision to do X, this decision to do Y, and each one of those could have been an obstacle to you getting to that point where you were making that money consistently, at least in the beginning, in releasing this romance. But I want to just kind of hop back, because I know that there are a lot of people out there, and I guess this kind of goes heavily into imposter syndrome, but who wants to talk to authors, who wants to have that experience of getting people on the podcast. I mean, I was the same. I started writing in 2015, released my first novella then, which did pretty well. But it was 2016, I started a podcast with a co-author of mine, Luke Condor, and it was the Story Studio podcast. And it was actually Luke that started inviting all these people on. And I was like, oh, we're never going to get these people on, because, they're quite big names. They're busy. They've got jobs. People are incredibly kind to share their knowledge. And I think realistically, authors just love talking about themselves and having that platform to share. But what was it in that initial, what was that initial thought process in setting up a podcast? Because there are lots of different ways to connect and to learn, but obviously you chose podcasting. So what was it that drew you to that form?
Well, I had listened to a lot of podcasts. Like when I was at my job that I didn't love, like for 7 years, I'm like, I was the admin assistant to a VP of sales in a very small company. And honestly, okay, I'm not working for anybody anymore. So like most people, like I was there to answer the phones and do some things, but so I had to be there for 8 hours to be able to answer the phones. Right. but the work that I didn't take 8 hours. Like the actual, like doing the things that I had. Now I did all of it. I did all of it well, but it didn't take me all the time to do. Like I listened to a lot of podcasts because that's what kept me going. Like, I'm like, okay, this is hard. I really like, my soul is draining. I am like, I hate this, not because it's a bad job or because of people I work with, but just because it's not fulfilling me at all. Like, I know that I have something more to offer. And so I had listened to podcasts a lot, because you can work and listen to a podcast. So like, on my little making quotes for people and things, I can still listen to a podcast while I'm doing that. And, Pat Flynn, and mine were mostly entrepreneurial podcasts because I really like that. I was in the Silicon Valley where there's a lot of entrepreneurs, and I was kind of vibing it and like, okay, yeah, I could do this. It was like, it was listening to all these other stories of entrepreneurs, which is what authors are actually, but
100%.
But listening to all these people's, how they started stories, and having the right interviewer, like a good interviewer, ask the questions that I wanted them to ask when I needed it, and that kind of, there's an intimacy in podcasting, I think, because the voices and stuff. And then I got to ask, and then with the podcasting, like it's not that expensive to start. Like, like this microphone cost me $60.
Nice.
And it's a good mic.
It sounds good on my end. Yeah.
It makes me sound really good. And that was like, and I'm like, and then.
Which microphone is it? Just to throw out something a bit geeky.
It's a Samsung Q2U.
Samsung Q2U. Add that to the show notes.
for anybody starting, I go back every year to like double check. But Pat Flynn from the Smart Passive Income podcast has a how to start a podcast guide that's free. It's like a blog post that's very lengthy. That's where I started. I just did that. I just did what Pat Flynn.
He's well worth listening to. If people haven't listened to that podcast, he's been in the business for a long time and has actually brought a lot of entrepreneurs to their own fame. So definitely worth checking that out.
Yes. And I have like I'm like, I fangirl over Pat Flynn a little bit because he's just like and Pat Flynn's like very like normal, like podcasting also, like, especially for women, I think you don't have to be like super attractive. Like here I am, I'm doing this, here with the camera, but like, you don't have to look good. And I'm not polished, Daniel. Like I am not a polished person. I'm not a polished speaker. I'm like not, but I don't have to be in podcasting. Like I will attract the people who like me. So I like that.
Yeah. No, I definitely echo that a lot because I mean, I leave in the stumbles in the podcast. I try and like, I feel like if you get too polished, like you say, it almost alienates the people that you're trying to reach. And there's something about reaching, it's that down to earth vibe. And, the stuff that we do, of what I've seen of what you do as well, is really trying to take people and show them that like, it doesn't have to be for the people who are polished all the time. This kind of business is accessible to everyone. And I just want to spin around to something that you said earlier, because I think it's quite an important point and something that I learned a fair few years back. But this idea that you had a moment in which, when you put all the course together, that there was a part of you that was like, well, I haven't done this, so therefore the information I'm giving people isn't valuable. And what I've certainly found, years and years ago, I used to teach parkour, free running, and there was one guy who couldn't do a thing. Like there was nothing he could actually do. But the amount of times I'd be trying to do something and he'd give me a tiny bit of information because he just understood how the body moved, even though he didn't do it himself. And just those little bits of advice. And I think there is an element of that with certain coaches who, sometimes you don't necessarily like, I think people look for those who have put their money where their mouth is. But at the same time, like there are people out there whose brains just work in that way that even if you haven't done it, and you can talk people through. And there's, I don't know, I'm trying to think how to explain it, but there is a weird process that comes with coaching when you're actually outside of someone else's business looking in. I mean, how did you approach getting over that kind of imposter syndrome? I know you said obviously you went through that course yourself, but was there anything else that you did specifically to strengthen your mind?
Well, so I was at like a very low point at that point. Like I'd been working on this for a while and it was kind of like, okay, well, let me just see. But I think what happened is, but like there's a lot of factors. Like life is so freaking complex and it's like the resistance and stuff. So my mom is narcissistic. Okay. We're going to go way into like therapeutic, like way back history. She's narcissistic. And I was like the whatever, there's the golden child, there's the scapegoat. I was a scapegoat.
Mm-hmm.
So I could never be more successful than her, or I couldn't have a relationship with her. And she was my primary parent. My dad kind of, so it was like, so my whole life up until about that point, and even at that point, it was me like devaluing myself mentally, like not allowing myself to recognize my skills or talents or things, things that I'm good at, which I am good at what you're saying. I'm excellent at looking at things and being like this.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't recognize it then and I didn't value it then. And, and so I was like at this low point, I'm like, I'm just going to do it. And I didn't have, some kind of, I did have imposter syndrome, but here's the thing. Like I realized in the last year that I valued myself so little that there was never anything to lose by reaching out to if they said no, it was like, what? That just confirms. And if they said yes, I was excited. Like I've also realized I did Becca Symes Write Better Faster. And I do have activator, which is like to get something done.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I want to start a podcast. Let me message them, like without thinking. So it's like this combo thing. And so what I did, so later I was just like, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but I think it should because I've spent 4 years doing this. So then I did it. But like other things were happening at the same time. I think I'm kind of woo-woo. So I think the universe kind of brings things to happen as they need to. So like that, I had in March, just a couple months after, when I'm still in this, like, I don't know, I think it's going to work and it's still barely working, it's working, but I'm like, what? It's working. And then both my grandparents, my mom's parents passed away. And my husband and I have been trying to have a baby with IVF and we didn't. And then COVID started, so we couldn't try again. And then my mom stopped talking to me all in like 2 months while COVID was happening. And at that point, the making money with my book was the only thing that was working. It was the only thing that was going well. It went from being the thing that wasn't working in December to being the only thing that was working. And it actually, the fact that I was making money was like, okay, I can spend money. I can like go to a therapist. I can do the things I need to do because I have this money from these books. Like it was a miracle. It was miraculous for me. But I also am like, I did put, it's like this weird, like it isn't just me though, but it's also, I put a heck ton of work. I put a lot of work in.
Yeah.
Like, so I don't even know if that answers the question exactly.
I think we got there. So talk me through that moment that the money actually started to come in. Cause I know for a lot of authors, for a lot of, earlier authors, and even those that have been trying for a while and haven't quite, hit their groove, found, the right vein to tap, there is this sense that, it's for the lightning strikes, it's for the people that, it's the 1 in 1,000, 1 in 100,000, whatever it is. And it seems like this elusive thing that can never come. And obviously we hear lots of stories about authors who are making the money in it and it happens. So what was it like for you when the numbers started to pile up and it started happening?
You say like the numbers started to pile up. Like I was like, like at like 1,000 page reads or 800 page reads, a day. Because when you're writing 40-page books, 800 page reads is math here. 20 people? 40. Yeah.
I'm not good at on the spot math. That sounds about right.
Okay, I'm like 2 zeros. Yeah, so that's 20 people that I don't know reading my book. And I'm like, oh, because it's a big deal, because they don't know me. They don't know that. And I was brand new pen name. I didn't have any kind of anything. And so as it's going, and I did enroll like a friend of mine who was a writer. I was like, do you want to try this with me? And we were both kind of like, okay. Like we had nothing. We're like, okay.
Mhm.
And so we were both doing it and comparing, and we're like, oh, like, oh, and it was, and for me, it was thrilling on multiple levels, because I'm like, oh, like not only is it working, it's working. Like
Mhm.
my program is working. So on an author level, just as a writer, it's exciting and thrilling, because you're like, people that I don't know are giving me 5-star reviews. Like that was very exciting. And then it was very gratifying, especially in the midst of all this crazy emotional stuff, to be like, okay, I do have something that I'm good at.
Mhm.
See, so it was, but I don't take it for granted. And I try not to take it for granted, because
Yeah.
because I know, and sometimes when I'm not good at all the time appreciating it, but I try to take time to be like, these are real people who are either giving me their money or giving me their time. And time, we all know, is like a real, like it's the most valuable thing.
Mhm.
Like an hour of time during someone's day to give to my book is special. They could be spending that with their kid or their, somebody, they could be doing something. They gave it to me.
Mhm.
And so yeah, every time as I'm watching those numbers go up and up, I'm like, this is special. I love it. It's still special. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
It's
Yeah.
beautiful. Talk to me a little bit about, you experimented with form. You essentially went for what is, I guess, much, much shorter than
Mhm.
what your genre dictates, and managed to
Mhm.
find success in that. Was there any kind of kickback at all from readers going, oh, this was a really, really quick read? Or did people just kind of take to that as a means of story?
Yeah. Well, actually, I mean, there's a category for it. There's a category for short, for there's like multiple there's like I haven't actually read in the 15-minute romance category, but there's like most of mine are about an hour, but there's a 45-minute romance, an hour romance, a 90-minute romance, and a 2-hour romance. And so
On Amazon?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, if you click through like Kindle top, if you go to like the cat or Kindle and you scroll down to romance and you scroll down, I think it might have a short reads under
Okay.
romance. So it doesn't break it down to 90, 40. I don't think it just does short reads. But because Amazon has like hidden categories that you can't just access easily. So so what I did before I started writing is I went and I read some of the books that were in there to see what the stories were like, because there's already an audience. It's a much smaller audience than just standard romance, but there is an audience for people who just want a short story. And I believe, I mean, you'll find sometimes you'll see bigger authors and bigger categories or other, like you'll see like a sci-fi who they do a novella and then they make it to the top of the short story 90-minute fiction, because the bigger one. Yeah. So I just followed it and there was an audience of people who already love them. And so I just kind of was like, I'm here too now. Like, if you want to try reading mine, and they did. So yeah.
And it was a series, right?
Yeah, I started with a series because I think series are a lot easier to sell long term. Like that's one of the strategies.
Yeah.
I link them.
Yeah, it's one that I've been in the business like 7 years, and it's one that I've yet to kind of branch out with my own fiction, because I've done a lot of collaboration. And I'm looking quite heavily into series at the minute, just to
like my co-author, I co-write now because we realized after a couple of years that we have very complementary writing skills. But
nice.
Initially, since we're really good friends, I wrote one series just mine, but then almost at the same time, we wrote a series together where she would write one book, I'd write one, she'd write one, I'd write one. They're in the same world because we're friends. We could collaborate. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to write this guy. Can you put him in the epilogue of your book? So that, people are like, who's that? and then they move to my book, and then I'll do the same. And from the beginning, we put all of our books in the same world. We actually, and since you're releasing pretty quickly, there's a lot of books.
Yeah.
And so we have a little map so that we're consistent about like, how far is it from Fairview to Oakwood City? Let's make sure we're consistent on that, because we have all of our books are in the same world. We can bring other characters in from previous books if we want, if it's handy. Yeah.
Love that. And just for perspective, how many books is that in total off the top of your head?
Right now it's around 50 in 2 years. Those are just mine. She has hers too.
Damn.
Yeah. But well, you imagine, okay, if you're writing, what we did was nice, because a lot of the authors in this space, they release one a week on their own. And what she and I did, because I'm like, I'm 1 a week, we did one every other week, but we would alternate. So like, I would get 2 weeks to write my 12,000 word book, and then we would read each other's for editing and and proofing, you know. So we did it mostly, a lot of it together. And again, that's another reason, like I say the 3,000 to, you know, I say that how fast, but because it's sexy. But there's a lot in it to make it work like that, you know, like it's more than that. But I want people to come in first to see that it can work, and then I explain how much goes into it.
But I like it. I like just the fact that, you know, you've made it work for you. You found a way that you know you can release your stuff consistently. And there's an author friend of mine who, the typical sort of books around, you know, horror and post-apocalyptic tend to be around 60 to 80,000 words. And I had no idea that they were pumping out books. And I was like, oh, how are you doing it? And they're like, oh no, that mine are about 35 to 40,000 words. And you think, like, you know, how much of a time difference that makes. And I think I've had a few conversations with my activated authors community recently about word counts, and how obviously it's good as a guide, but essentially they're arbitrary, because as long as the story's solid, and as long as it like delivers on the tropes and it's there, it could be anything from like 40,000 to 170,000 words. As long as people are invested in the story, we very easily get caught up in these word counts. So I really like that, you know, you've been able to go, we're going to make them shorter, but we're going to keep them coming out consistently. They're going to be branded. They're going to be in the same world. And you've managed to build this universe, this property that is just, you know, cycling and bringing new people in and making it happen. So I like that kind of outside thinking seems to be a theme through a lot of your journey, in the sense of, you know, I'm going to start a podcast because I want to learn. I'm going to put up a course based off of, you know, the people I've spoken to. Where does that come from? Because I know that you said, obviously, you were never sort of supported into the creative arts. And, you know, my journey's a bit different. I was never supported, but I was never discouraged. It was kind of like, if I wanted to, it's kind of like, oh, there you go, off you go, have a play and like see how that goes. Where do you think that comes from in you?
I think it's always been like, I think I've always had this, like, I know it could be better. Like, I know it can be better. Did I believe it all the time? No. Like, did I believe it for myself? No. But was I here's the thing. I can either settle and just let it be this, whatever, like, and sometimes it was bad, you know, like, and but it really is wherever you're at. You're like, this could either be it, or it could be something else. And like, my life has never been so great in all the ways. Like, I've had definitely amazing friends, amazing different times, but there's never been a time when there wasn't something that I was like, do I want to just stay in this admin job where nobody appreciates me? No. Like, so it's either this, and I went and I searched other jobs, you know, but I'm like, but generally speaking, I'm really smart and I'm really go-getter, and most managers are not the kind that appreciate that actually as much as I do. Like, and how it's, and in like an appropriate level of appreciation for how awesome I am at those jobs. You know what I mean? So I'm like, do I want to have these people not appreciate me for the rest of my life, or do I want to do something else? And it's always been like, well, And I do this a lot. I say, especially with big decisions, like when I was teaching in New York, and I was getting very, very depressed because it's cold and dirty. Like I like New York. Like I love New York. I love the kids, but I was getting depressed. And but I was doing Teach for America, which was a program where you could get your master's degree while you teach. So I joined that. So I was getting my teaching master's at Queen's College at the same time as teaching. So it's like they pay for the schooling. But the master's program I was in was a 3-year program, and I'd been there for 2 years, and I was really depressed and I was struggling. And I was like, okay, have a choice. I can stay on this path here for another year and get even more depressed because it's not getting better. Or I can choose something else, something that's a question mark that I don't know what it will be, but I know that it won't be this. You know, and but that's an example, but I do actually that quite a bit where I'm like, okay, looking like this or possibly something better, like, or if it's a different situation, I can be like, okay, presume all these things happen. Here's what's the worst. Like I lose my job, I like what will then happen? And usually the fear is bigger than like when I actually look at the actual results of what's going to happen. Like, okay, what's going to happen if I start a podcast and ask people to be on it? They say no. Then what? What have I lost? Nothing. I'm still in the same spot. But if they say yes, then I get something. And so that's kind of where I'm like, I'm willing to go for the possibility. I'm willing to take action towards the possibility of something better.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to settle for not being happy.
Yeah. We have quite a lot of parallels. In my old day job, I was set to do a qualification with them, and I'd put, I think, 1.5 years, 2 years into that. I had 1 year left to go. And the option was either stay with them to work and, you know, they kind of pay for it, or I leave and then I pay the remainder and do all the study and then carry on. And I was the same. It was that choice between, you know, happiness or another year of, like, it wasn't misery, but it definitely wasn't like I was definitely done with a lot of the crap that kind of comes with that kind of job. But sometimes it is taking that risk. And you're right, like, what's the worst that's going to happen? Like I fail at the thing that I try, and then I get another job and I'm back in the same position that I was. It's, you know, life is a very, very short thing to sit in misery. Yeah. Yes. And I like being happy. Like I like feeling good. Like I'm willing to put the effort in, you know, because I'm like, time. I see a lot of, like, time is going to pass regardless. Like these 5 years are going to pass. A year is going to pass. 2 years is going to pass, whether I'm working towards my dream or not working towards my dream. So I can either in 2 years be like, I tried and it didn't work, or I can be like, I tried and it did work, or I could just be like, oh, I never tried, but it's still gonna, I'm still gonna get there. Yeah, absolutely. So, and yeah. So you went and you started writing the series, and you obviously have all the podcasts and the Author Like a Boss. How did the reality of full-time creation match your expectation, or did it? That's a good question. It was, well, I stopped doing the podcast at that point because emotionally and mentally, I didn't have, like, there was so much going on for me. Like I did minimal coaching because I did minimal coaching. Like I had a couple one-on-one people that I was like, hey, I'll show you. But I stopped doing the podcast because I just didn't have the bandwidth. And so it was actually, here's the thing. Writing is not my first love. Like, it's not my first love. And for most authors that I talk to, it is. My first love is helping people, helping creative people make money. Like that's what I'm, you know, I think there's I can't remember the name of the book, but you'll know what I mean. Like it's your zone of excellence versus your zone of genius. I can't remember what book that's from. I think it's Wayne Dyer's or something. Anyway, so the zone of excellence is things that you're really good at.
but they don't light you up. And the zone of genius is the things that you're really good at, but that fuels you and lights you up. And so I'm excellent at writing books, but they don't fuel me and light me up. And so what fuels me and lights me up and gives me energy and what I love to do is help creative people make money, especially women for me. But I didn't start out that way. It just turns out that I appeal mostly to women because of my energy and tone or whatever. Like but that's what I love. So when I started writing, like I was so grateful because it gave me the money that I needed when I needed it. But I've actually stopped. I haven't published for a little bit in a few months because my friend who I started with, we started co-writing because I like outlining and revising. I don't actually really enjoy the actual writing part. It's hard for me. Like I'm good at it, but it's hard. And she likes but she doesn't like outlining or revising. And I was like,
perfect setup.
Yes. And so we started co-writing. And that has been lovely for us. But we had a little bit of burnout because she works full time. She's a single mom. So we couldn't. So now we're kind of rearranging things. We're working on a new pen name, something we enjoy that fuels us a little more with the co-writing still. And I've decided like from this point on, I will probably only co-write because I enjoy it. Because I'm tired of doing things that don't feel good. Basically, like I'm like, if I can do this with co-writing and split the profits and she does what she loves and I do what I love, why not do that?
Yep. Totally feel that. Was the book The Genius Zone by Gay Hendricks?
Yes.
There we go.
That one.
Boom.
No. That's probably the second one, but it is by Gay Hendricks. It has a picture of an apple on it with a cup.
We'll find it. We'll pop it in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll pop it in. But it is by Gay Hendricks.
Okay, perfect. That's a good starting point. But I like what you kind of described there is the journey of being a writer. And I think one thing I really try and dispel with this podcast, with the work that I do with activated authors, is that it's not helpful to see authors who are making the big bucks, and on the outside it all just looks like, oh, it's easy. They get up from like 8 till 10, they'll write, and then they do a little bit of marketing and it's all just easy. Like there is a journey, there's an element of human and life, and you have things with your parents and your friends and all these relationships and stuff that impact what it is to be an author. And it sounds like over your journey, what I like is you've not been scared to kind of go, this isn't working for me, and like you say, there is a better way. And to get to the point where you're at the minute with your co-writer, where it's they draft, you do the outlines and stuff, and then edit after, just seems like a perfect setup. And it is, I know even for me, it's been a case of I've switched genre, I've worked with different people, I've tried different styles, I've gone different schedules, I've written a lot and then I've written a lot less. And it's consistency is, I think, something that everyone tries to cling to, but it's really difficult to be consistent. Actually, I don't think it's all that healthy for growth to be consistent all the time over a series of years. I mean, obviously you don't know where this co-writing relationship is going to go at the minute, but one thing that I really like that you mentioned there was something that's a bit more sustainable for you in terms of enjoyment, or where your passions align. How do you view sustainability? How are you approaching reaching that point of being able to write and keep the train moving forward?
Yeah. So there was something I want to touch on that you said in there. Now I lost it. I should be taking notes for like remembering. For sustainability, what we're doing. So the downside of the short romances is that they're very formulaic. Like it's the positive and the not. Like it's a positive in terms of like producing, but it's also like, imagine that you have to come up with a whole new couple, 2 whole new characters, 2 character arcs. Cause we do good ones. We do good ones that have like almost they have a full story arc in mini with a full character arcs in mini every week or 2. Like it's a lot. That's a lot of creative generating, not just the writing part, but like, okay, new ideas every time that are not the same as the ones that you did a week ago or 2 weeks ago or 6 weeks or like 6 months ago. Like it's hard to make them all different, but so so that creatively is not very fueling, because you don't have enough words in a short story, in a short romance, to play that much. There's not enough words to play and stay in that genre. And so sustainability wise, we've shifted away. We're probably going to release one a month, maybe, on that, just to kind of keep ourselves alive. We're going to focus on, we're going to work on rebranding. So I'll make new covers, look at the blurbs, update the back matter, which we didn't do because it takes a lot of time to update the back matter on 50 books. Like you have to format everything.
Oh, Jesus, can you imagine?
Yeah. Yes, I can. And so we have other ways that we're going to try and make them make money without having to do a month, a book a week or a book every 2 weeks. And then while we're doing that, so it's easier to kind of reformat because it takes a different part, like that. It does take a different part of the brain than actually the generating ideas. So now we're working on longer books, different pen names, different topic, something that we add. We like the paranormal, like dragons. Like we were doing contemporary romance, and it's like not enough. Like I also like dragons. Magic. Yes. I like having magic in books because there's so much more that you can do when there's magic, because you're not constrained by, is that realistic? You're like, yes, it is in this world because it's magic, so which fuels, which helps the sustainability, because you're like, we're having more fun now because we get to play more. There's more room to play, more words to play, more worlds to play in. And so that's the main, and we're not putting that schedule on ourselves, because we're not like, okay, we have to do it like this. We're like, well, let's just play with it a little bit. Like we have money still coming. Like I haven't released a book since December, and right now it's the end of May. And I still get, I still made like $2,500.
I can't complain. Yeah.
without nothing. Now I do have some ads going, and I haven't looked how much I spent, but like Amazon ads, just Amazon ads. But that's it. And with that, nothing.
That's the beauty of this, isn't it? That's the point of what we do, that residual ongoing effect.
Yes. So it's like in 5 months, I've done nothing, not even a newsletter. But we're gonna ramp it back up, because I'm like, oh, we can do, but so that's kind of the sustainability, is working on something that fuels our creative sustainability, while also, like, I think we're gonna do like a series a month, rebranding the things that we already created to make them more, because at this point the first series are 2 years old. Their covers are
love that. We are getting close to time, so I've got a couple more bits that I want to touch on. I know it goes so quickly.
Talk about this forever. Okay, yes.
Definitely have to get you back on to expand on this chat, because there's a lot of places that we could go. But one thing that we kind of teased around a lot is the fact that you had 70 odd authors come on your podcast, and you distilled a lot of information from them and put it into your course. Are you happy to share a couple of the universal truths that came from these authors, and sort of big lessons that you learned that went into your program?
Yes, absolutely. There's a couple of them, like newsletters. Okay, that's an easy one. Have a newsletter. But I think the one that it doesn't, there's the two that I would say that don't get touched on as much. One is like the tribe. I call it Refine Your Tribe, which is the community of people that you like, finding other authors in your genre that are doing that you can befriend, not in a sleazy networky way, although it is networking kind of, but like
it's a very fine line.
It's a very fine line, but I think the line is easier for authors because we're authors. Okay. So we don't usually, most of the authors I know are not comfortable even with sales until they practice, because they're creatives first, not entrepreneurs first. So when you go to meet people, you're really meeting people as like potential friends, because we've all been to like the bookstore, and you go into the section that you love, and you're like reaching for a book, and somebody else, maybe we haven't all, but like somebody else is there also looking at the same books, and you're like instant friends almost, because you're like, you love that series, so do I. And there's like, yes. And that's how it is with other authors in your genre, because they're writers who love the same topics that you do. I mean, look at Daniel and I have never spoken before this. And we're like,
No.
dragons, books, friends. Yes. It's really easy and natural. And there's a lot of opportunity, like practically there's a lot of opportunities that comes from like group series or anthologies or newsletter swaps, but it's not like you're doing like, I want to do you're like, oh, you're my friend, of course I want to promote your book in my newsletter, and vice versa. So that's one thing, is developing those friendships and relationships is important, and I don't think talked about that much. And then the second thing is that author brand is not just like the colors on your website. Like your brand,
yep, bravo,
your brand is it is the colors on your website. It's all on social media, but it's your book cover, but not just even your book cover. It's the words that you use in your description. It's the characters themselves are part of your brand. It's the setting in the book. Like there's aspects of your stories that are your brand. And because I remember I had a friend of a friend who knew Shannon Mayer. And so she was my 6th interview, which was big for me when I first started. Okay. So Shannon Mayer is a massive indie author. And she told me, like, at that point, she'd been writing these like kind of badass heroines, and her readers expected that. And she did a series, like 3-book, a trilogy, that where the heroine was just a little bit softer. Now it was still action, it was still urban fantasy, it was still all the things. And actually she told me on that interview that was actually, she thought it was like a better story and one of her better series, but people didn't like it as much because the heroine wasn't quite as badass as they'd been in the previous. Now, does that mean you can't do it? No. Like, you can write the books that you want, but your readers will notice, and that's part of your brand. And if you can be in alignment, and I like to qualify this, because I like write to market so long as you love the market. Yes. Like I have everything in my course is about finding what readers love and what you love and where they overlap. And that's what I call the sweet spot. Marketing, branding, tropes. Yeah. So that's what I would say is the branding is more than people think. And it's very important.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I want to dive into that more, but unfortunately,
I know, but we don't have time. I know. Okay, I would love to chat again.
Oh, 100%. We'll sort something out. So I've got 2 more questions. One of them's a bit of a new thing, which I'm very, very excited to kind of bring into that. Even the people listening to this don't know that's going to happen yet. Not to put any pressure on you. But the last main question from myself is the same question that I ask all of my guests that come on the show. And that question is, why do you, Ella, write?
Oh, I write. This is not the answer that I expected that came up, but I write because so many other people wrote for me.
Yeah.
Like I didn't know. I'm about to cry because I'm like, oh, this is why. Is because there are people that saved my life. Literally, in the last 2 years, there was a time when I was like, essentially, like in a very, very dark trigger warning place, and there was 2 series of books that I could read, and I did. That's all I could do. I was like, okay. Like in between writing my own books, I was like, okay, besides writing my own books to make sure I have the money, I'm reading these 2 series, and they saved my life. Literally, like they saved my life. So I write if I can be that for somebody else.
That's powerful. I've never heard it phrased like that before as well. And like, you're right, there were and normally I don't expand at this point, but like, so I remember there was very, very distinctly, it was a nonfiction book for me that I'm always like, oh, that book was like powerful at the time that I needed it, but it's never been phrased to the point of like, oh, but a guy wrote that. and gifted that to the world. Like without that person behind it, that would have been nothing. For people interested, that book was Fuck It by John C. Parkin, which kind of teaches how in Western culture, saying the word fuck it is catharsis in the same sense that Buddhism teaches Zen. It's that idea of letting go. So you get all wound up, you get all pent up, and then you say fuck it, and it dispels, it's gone.
I want to start a podcast that's called, actually, I've already gotten the domain name. It's like the other side of fuck it.
Nice.
because it's like everything you want is on the other side of fuck it. It started, but in my 2 books, let me tell you the 2 series that were worked for me. So I'm like, yes, Daniel, yes. But the ones that I saved my life were, there was the Ghost Mountain series by Audrey Faye, which I found like through a miracle of the universe, because it's like the covers, it's not my normal genre. It's not like, but beautifully written for character healing. Like the characters are amazing. And then Christy Cunning's the Pretty Monsters series, which is a reverse harem, but like it's reverse harem, but her plots are so complex. It like kept my interest. You could read it 5 times. It's like one of the ones like I wish I could read it from the first time again, because it's surprising. And I just want to mention, she passed away last year. She was one of the people I wanted to interview. Like she was like on my dream interview list, and she passed away in like a car accident. And so if you have any interest, like I don't know how long her family or people are going to keep her books up. So if you're like, I'm curious,
get them.
Yeah,
get them now.
Go read them. Okay,
man. Okay, right. So I am, as of this episode, adding in a new section to this podcast, and I am kind of unashamedly stealing it from another podcast. So I don't know if you listen to Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett. It's a British sort of entrepreneurial podcast that started a couple of months ago, and it's raving across. But he has a section at the end where essentially each of his guests, when they say goodbye on the podcast, will write down a question for the next guest to answer. So what I had was last week's guest write down a question for you to answer. So if you're up for it, it's actually 2 questions that I'd like to throw at you. Okay. So the questions are, what keeps you up at night and what gets you up in the morning?
What keeps me up at night is, well, last night it was all the thoughts of this web, the sales page that I've been working on.
Oh no.
I'm like, I'm having trouble. Sometimes you only work all day, and then when you fall asleep, you dream of the work that you did, and you're like, gosh dang, I don't even feel like. But generally speaking, what keeps me up at night is that worry that, am I good enough? It's the base. It's the base of, it's the base fear of everything. Like, am I good enough to coach these people? Am I good enough for them to believe me? Am I good enough to write these books? Even though, I'm doing it, that am I good enough? And the consequences of not being good enough. Yeah. Like if I'm not good enough, then I won't be able to support myself if I'm not. So that's the fear. That's the thing that keeps me up. And I try to just, journal my way through it or something. But what gets me up in the morning, what gets me up in the morning is a number of things. You're like catching me right in the middle of like everything shifting for me right now. So it's like, I want to, like, I'm a happy person generally. And I've recently realized that like me being in the world, like not me being by myself behind a computer in COVID time, but like the way that I do better, like I can't think about being happy and be happy. I have to express being happy, and I can only do that with other people. Like I can't thinking about being, feeling good and vibing alone in my house. It's just thinking about it. It's not being it. The only way I realized recently, the only way I can be it, like as myself, being it, is by expressing it with other people. And so, and I hope I don't feel like sound arrogant or something, but I have a talent. It's like what people come to me for, all the entrepreneurial things. They say, what do people come to you for? What do people come to you for? Do they come to you for your like cupcake recipe? Do they come to you? Like, what do they ask you for advice or whatever? And mine, nobody asks me for advice. They come to me when they want to feel good. I'm like, the common denominator is that people want to feel good. They come to me like, and they leave like, yeah. And on almost any topic. And so I'm like, I want to lean into that now. Like I want to lean into, because I enjoy it too. Because I am like, yeah, me being happy and helping other people feel good is, we all end up feeling good, including me. So why not do more of that?
Yeah.
And that's is what is getting me up. And I listened to Edward Starr's 25 miles. 25 miles from home, girl. My feet are hurt. Like I listened to that this morning, and that's like that kind of funk gets me up.
Perfect. It's a superpower. People need it. And especially during, like, I've definitely felt within COVID that whole, like, I'm doing all this stuff, but it's behind the screen and I want to do this stuff in person. So again, another parallel, it's on my agenda to start doing like more in-person stuff and get back out into the world, because
me too.
COVID can fuck off at this point.
Daniel. So now you need to know my question. Ooh.
We'll do that. So we'll write it down after.
Okay.
And then, so we'll keep it a surprise. And then, you
So
don't have to do it on the spot.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we'll list it off in next week's. But I do have one final question, which is, where can my listeners find out everything about yourself and all that you're working on?
Okay. The best place right now is authorlikeaboss.com, which I'm redoing all the sites to make it look really like to bring it up to speed with what I've done in the last 2 years. So authorlikeaboss.com is the best place to find myself as like coach. And then like Liz Fox, I guess Amazon. I don't even have a website for her.
It's all on there. It's clearly selling.
But it's easy. But the author name is part of the brand, because it's you can't misspell it. And it's only 2 syllables. Liz Fox.
Perfect. All planned. Beautiful. Yeah. Well, so a big thank you, Ella, for joining me on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure on my side to have you on and to pick your brain for an hour or so.
Me too. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody. Thank you.
No worries. A massive thank you to you, the listeners, for tuning in. As always, if you're looking to level up your writing and activate your author career, head on over to activatedauthors.com to find out all about our community, our resources, and everything else that we've got going on. And one more time from me and Ella, goodbye, and I will see you next week.
Activate your energy.